So questions about any of that before I proceed? Okay. So let's, today's kind of grammar lesson is going to be about relative clauses, So pretty much relative clauses is knowing when to use the word that in a sentence versus when do you use the word which in a sentence. So what is a relative clause then? So anytime you have a sentence that's kind of got a sentence built within the sentence, that's what you call a relative clause. You could also kind of call it a complex sentence, So a relative clause usually starts with one of these types of adverb or relative pronouns. So it starts with who, whom, whose, which, or that. Who, whom, whose, which, or that. So these words, whenever you use these words in a sentence, that's when you always have the sentence within the sentence. So if you note here, you had the students, then who were most impressive graduated with honors. So you can kind of cut that who were most impressive out. You can, the sentence would still make sense, right? You would say the students graduated with honors. Anytime you have a relative clause, it's kind of like additional information that's in the sentence. We use these all the time in our spoken language and in our written language. The key is to know when to use which word, which pronoun correctly. Okay, whether you use who, whom, whose, which, or that. We see some other examples. It was an experience that influenced my career choice. Well, you can just, if you didn't have the that there, you could just say it was an experience, period. That would still make sense. Anytime you have a sentence within a sentence, that's when you need to think about which word do you use. And to understand that, you kind of have to go down and think, is it a restrictive clause or is it a non-restrictive clause? When it's a restrictive clause, the meaning of the sentence gets impacted if you take that phrase out. So in this sentence, you say women who work are happier than women who don't work. Note here that if you cut the phrases out, you say women are happier than women. Right? Well, that doesn't make any sense. All right, so women are happier than women. That makes no sense at all. So in a restrictive clause, whenever you have these types of things that add extra meaning to the sentence, if you can't cut it out and the sentence makes sense, you don't put commas. Okay, you don't put commas. So students who ask questions learn a lot. If you can take that out, you could say students learn a lot. Well, you don't maintain the same meaning of the sentence if you cut that phrase out. So basically this distinction here is if it's something that you can't cut out and the meaning stay the same, you don't use commas. Compare that to the non-restricted clause. So let's say going to the movies, comma, which I love to do, comma, can be very expensive. Well, if you take that phrase out, you can say going to the movies can be very expensive. Well, in that case, the sentence still makes sense. Going to the movies can be very expensive. Sentence still makes sense that way. So that's why you put commas around it in this case. Going to the movies comma, which I love to do, comma, can be very expensive. If you cut that which I love to do out, it still makes sense. So you use a comma in this case. So the question is, when do you use which pronoun? When do you use which pronoun? So the biggest distinction that we have to kind of make, that we kind of have to note here, is when do you use which or when do you use that? Basically, which is used when it's a non-restrictive clause, when it's something that can be taken out of the sentence and the sentence still makes sense. That's when you use which here. So the Empire State Building, which used to be the tallest building in the world, is still a popular tourist attraction. So you use the which here because it's extra information that can be omitted from the sentence and it still makes sense. And anytime you use the which, it has to go with a comma. A comma has to precede it. Okay, so anytime you use which, you always have to have a comma. You use that when it's a phrase that is important to the meaning of the sentence. The lessons that we have learned are no more important than the lessons that we have yet to learn. So if you take that, if you take this clauses out, the sentence says the lessons are no more important than the lessons. Again, that doesn't make sense. This is extra information that's necessary to understanding the meaning of the sentence. So in this case, you use that here because it's simply not information you omit. Now, let's say that you use the word which here. It doesn't sound wrong if you say it. If you say the lessons which we have learned are no more important than the lessons which we have yet to learn. It doesn't sound wrong, but it is. Okay, in the spoken word, this is the case where in the spoken word, it's not necessarily wrong, but in the written word, it is. Okay, so you use that in this case when it's something that you can omit from the sentence. Okay. So again, even though which sounds right, in this case, it's not. Even in this sentence, if you said the Empire State Building, that used to be the tallest building in the world, is still a popular tourist attraction. That doesn't sound horrible when it comes off the tongue, but which is the word you use in that case. So that's pretty much the difference between when you use that or which. And I noted, I'm going to go over this in enhanced class because I notice it's a pretty common error that I see very frequently. It's not as bad as comma splices or run-ons or sentence fragments or anything like that, but it's still an issue that I encounter pretty often. So pay attention when you're using the word which or that. In your papers, as always, unlike Microsoft Word, you can hit Control F, you can type which, or you can type that. You can see every instance where you use the word. So that's something else you guys can kind of add in your checklist whenever you proofread a paper. All right. Make sure that you're using the appropriate word in every circumstance. That's pretty easy to do because the word processor finds every instance where you use them. So questions about that? When do you use which or that? Give me some thumbs up icons if you understand. Give me some thumbs up icons on the Zoom. Like reactions, thumbs up. All right. Good deal.
How do we do that?
You click reactions, and then you can give the thumbs up, just like that here. They've added lots of new reactions, it looks like. Leah's crying. So that's the state of mind of many of us right now. Okay, so back to this. I also kind of want to go over when you use who or whom. So which or that is used whenever you're talking about something that's not a person. Right? You're talking about an object or an animal or something like that. You use who or whom whenever you talk about people. So this kind of works. This kind of works the same way. Who, as you see, is used when the meaning is kind of important to the meaning of the sentence. So I know a woman who has 2 children. Well, who has 2 children is kind of important to the meaning of the sentence. All right, so you use who in this case. So who kind of functions like that does when you're talking about something that's not human. Whom is used whenever it's something that you can omit from the sentence. Whom sounds kind of archaic in a way when it comes off the tongue. It sounds like you're reading from like the King James Bible or something. Right? It kind of sounds 17th century. My friend has 2 children whom she loves very much. So note that the whom has a comma preceding it, right? Just like how which has a comma preceding it above. And whenever you use the word whom, you always have a subject and a verb follow it as well. So my friend has 2 children whom, then you have another subject and verb. She loves very much. So again, this is a case where if you use who, it doesn't sound wrong when it rolls off the tongue. So my friend has 2 children who she loves very much. It doesn't sound wrong, but technically it is. They're supposed to use whom whenever it's information that you can kind of omit from the sentence. Then you see they use whomever here too. I will support whomever the committee recommends for the position. I would say don't use the word whomever. That word just sounds clunky to me. And then, just as always, just like how we were talking last week with words like it's, like IT apostrophe S or theirs, right? Anytime you have a possessive, she was this distinguished public servant whose reputation was impeccable. Anytime you use possession, you would say you would use the word whose. So who. So again, the difference: when do you use who? When do you use whom? When do you use whose? Whose is used to show possession. So I think this sheet doesn't have any practice questions. But to recap here, that you use that when the meaning of the sentence changes, if you would omit that phrase. You use which when with a comma when the meaning of the sentence will stay the same if you take that phrase out. You use who, right? Just like how you would use that whenever the meaning of the sentence would be impacted if you take it out. You use whom whenever the meaning of the sentence would not change if you would take that out. You use whose whenever you're showing possession. So that's pretty much the basic recap here. Again, I will pull up a piece of my own writing here just to kind of see how often I do this. Let's see. I'm just going to pull some random paper up I wrote like 5 years ago for a grad class. This is a random paper I wrote. Let's use Control F and see how often I use who or that or which. We'll type the word that in. Did I really not use the word that at all in the paper? Yeah. Here we go. I argue that we can gain a more comprehensive portrait. All right, so that's kind of important, essential to the meaning of the sentence. In order to do this, the public has to be taught that only such men are fitted to practice dentistry. Sometimes in the sentences, you don't have to include the word that. Like let me go back to the other page real quick. Go back to the that's. The word that is oftentimes implied in the sentence too. So like this sentence, you can omit the that. You can say the lessons we have learned are no more important than the lessons we have yet to learn. Note here that the sentence still makes sense if you leave the that out. The that is kind of built into the language naturally. So you don't always have to state it. The lessons we have learned are no more important than the lessons we have yet to learn. So even including the word that is even optional here, right? Including it is optional because it's already built into the structure of the sentence. So that's one more thing I wanted to point out. With that, you can oftentimes leave it out and it'll still make sense. So that's a cutting clutter kind of issue, right? So if you're using the word that a lot, you might cut a few of those out to avoid clutter in your sentences. And for all of you who are working on your midterms right now, right, that's something to pay attention to. So go back to our lessons from a couple of weeks ago on cutting clutter. And all those strategies we went over, right? Use those strategies to practice cutting out the fat in your writing. So questions, comments, concerns, anything about relative clauses? So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to come up with another quiz. I'm going to combine last week's stuff with this week's stuff, kind of make a big quiz. So remember last week's stuff was on common spelling errors, and things like that, right? Well, I'm going to combine last week's grammar lesson with this week's, kind of give you a big quiz. So I'm going to write that up probably after class today, and I'll let you guys know when that's up. So take that, whenever I do get that up, take that by the end of the week, and then I'll have more points to give you for the enhanced part of the class that way. So all the stuff last week will be combined with the which and that and who and all that stuff. All right. So I'll make the quiz this time where you can get back to it. You can take it in chunks if you want. You don't have to take it all at once. I'll make it like that this time. So again, you can even use a cheat sheet with it or whatever. I really don't care. All I care about is you get the answers right. Because if you get the answers right, then hopefully you won't do it in your own writing. Right. So that's all I care about. So in class today, we're in our next part of class today, we're going to start talking about beginnings of paper 3. Paper 3 is still going to be a long ways off. That's what we're going to be talking about in the main part of class today. So just to brace yourself for what's coming ahead, and we'll be talking about that here shortly. So let me to just quickly take attendance here, and we'll call this part of the class over. So I got Dante, Erica, Caden, Leah, Levi Williams, Madison, Molly, Sierra, and Ethan. All right, we'll see the rest of you here in an hour when we come back for regular class. All right. And I'll keep the Zoom open in case any of you guys want to chat or ask me questions or anything like that over the next hour. So I'll keep the Zoom open. I'll shut it down really quickly just so the recording will save, but I'll open it back up in like 5 minutes. So in about 5 minutes, I'll open it back up if you want to ask me any questions. So see you guys in a little bit.